This is the village of Nether Poppleton, just outside York. As you can see, most of the houses are modern, some are Victorian, a few are 18th or at a push 17th century. But from up here, it looks very different. Even I can recognise a traditional medieval village layout, with the main street running up to the church and lots of little plots running off it. And those earthworks to the side of the church are an officially registered medieval site. But the locals think it's older. They think they can trace the roots of their village back to the Normans or even the Saxons. Are they right? We've got just 3 days to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you know what you're supposed to do next? About a third of them. Well done, Vic. We want you all to get back to your homes with your pet archaeologist in your hand and start digging, all right? Off you go! As they all set off, there's a great sense of community spirit about. Many people are digging in their own gardens, or they'll help out their less able neighbours. They'll bring all their finds to the incident room. We'll analyse and date them, and when we've identified the oldest, we'll decide where to put trenches in tomorrow. We've divided the village into 5 sections, each one with its own archaeologist, to make sure that things are done properly. Across the village, test pits are opening all over the place, and everyone's doing their part.
When you dig a trench, if it's a metre at the top, it must be a metre at the bottom. In other words, the sides of the trench must always be absolutely vertical. This means that the layer that you've got exposed actually on the bottom of the trench, you can actually see it in section. So don't just dig in the middle of the hole, dig right up to the edges, keep them straight. There's Phil's gospel lesson for the day.
By mid-morning, we're well on our way to exploring this side of the village where the main street and houses are. But over here to the east lies the church. It was built in Norman times, so it's possible there was something else there at that time.
The church is usually a central feature of the community, so if we're going to understand how people have lived here, we need to look at the church.
Is that one Norman?
I think Norman in its present form, but there must be earlier and later stuff as well.
Do we know much about the actual history of this site, Sarah?
Well, the church is dedicated to St Everilda, who's a very unusual dedication. There are only 2 churches dedicated to her in Yorkshire. She was a 7th century saint. We think that Bishop Wilfrid, who was Bishop of York, encouraged her to settle in Yorkshire with 2 other nuns in the 670s, and around them a community, it said, of up to 80 nuns soon formed.
Back in the village, people are beginning to get the hang of things.
Nope, nothing in that one.
And some finds are coming up.
You see a tad, a bit of green glaze over there.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost as old as I am.
Another stone entomb.
I think you've got a Roman brick.
You've got a good imagination.
Very vivid, yes. Very vivid.
The early signs, at least in this trench, look good.
That's what I'd call proper medieval. You're like 13th, 14th century. Jug sherds, it's local stuff probably, made somewhere around York. These haven't travelled far at all, so, I mean, I think you could well be on top of some medieval archaeology here.
But you never believed, would you, that...
No, I'd have never believed this was here at all.
I see you've got a pipe there, Phil. Anything else?
Yeah, you see here, Tony, got a little child burial.
Oh.
Just one of those things, really. I mean, you know it's a burial ground.
What are you going to do with it?
We're going to give it the due respect it deserves and just leave it alone. Funnily enough, it doesn't actually detract from the objectives of of the trench here.
Which is?
Well, you see, if I get my shovel, see if I slot it in there.
Yeah.
Now, that is the base of the foundations. So the whole church is sitting on big stones like this. The main thing is that there is nothing, no walls coming this way. So in fact, we know that there was it doesn't look as though there are any aisles or transepts coming this way off of that wall.
Because we thought there might. You see that curve there, Tony?
Yeah.
Looks if there's a an opening in there, and we thought that something might come off here. Well,
So you think it
doesn't.
might just be a door?
I think it might be more like a sort of tomb set in the wall,
Oh, I
or an
see.
Easter sepulchre or something. Clearly it's not a structure coming out this way, so it's answered that.
So now you've answered that, do you have to continue with this trench, or can you...
No, because we know that it was not wider. What we've now got to prove is whether or not it was longer.
So that's this
So
way.
that's when you wrap it around here?
Wrap it around the corner.
Across the village, even more test pits are opening up. There are now 32 of them. 3 o'clock day one, and this whole area is checkered with test pits. There's one down there by that yellow bucket, then 2 gardens along, there's one over there, then another 3 gardens along by that guy in the red hat, there's one, and then way at the end of that same garden by that blue tarpaulin is another one. Well, this worked. Now Paul and Carenza are complaining they've got too much to do.
If you could just put them down there somewhere.
9 a.m. and there's frantic activity in the incident room. Outside, the locals are gathering to find out what we can tell from the test pits yesterday. Inside, we're still trying to work it out.
We've got no Saxon pottery at all from this end of the village. And it's not until we start heading west through the village that we get a few fragments of Saxon pottery, tiny triangle here showing just a few grams of pottery, tiny little amount there, a bit more here as we head west, and then even further west in this completely different bit of the village, what looks like a different history.
Well, I think we've got to build on what we did yesterday, take this test pitting strategy and apply it to this area. We've got to look at around the old stables, the granary, you know, the space at the back of the incident room. Let's get some trenches in there, you know, get some more local people involved in digging those, take it forward.
So up by the church, we open a test pit here. And here. And another here. And John does some more geophysics in and around the church to see if we can find other targets. Mick's getting more and more excited. It's not just Saxon he wants, he thinks that there was a monastery here. That would mean a settlement 400 years earlier than the present church. Could he be right? Mick, you've closed down this trench.
Yeah, well, it's told us all we needed to know, which is that the church doesn't go on further east.
But that means we've still got this 400-year-old gap between the time the nun died here and the time they put up this church in memory of it.
Yes, but I think looking at it as a gap's probably wrong. I mean, we're pretty sure of what would have happened during that period.
Well, what do you think happened?
Well, what tends to happen is when you get somebody who's turned into a saint, you often have a monastic community with it. And that is unlikely to have survived more than a couple of hundred years because the Scandinavians coming through here.
Well, the old Vikings.
Yeah, the Vikings, and they burn everything down, they destroy everything. If there's ever a nunnery here, it just evaporates.
Stuart's survey of the earthworks around the church has thrown up some interesting results. Here's the church. There's a medieval moated site just here. But there's also a whole other system of earthworks. This seems to be a roadway from the river heading straight towards the church. There also seems to be a large platform at the top of it, and off to the side is a large lump in the ground, another platform. It looks like it could be a boundary ditch of some sort, so we put a trench just here to see if it is.
What's nice here is we can see 2 distinct phases of archaeology. We've got the later wall, which looks to be 18th century handmade bricks running down the garden, and they're overlying straight on top of this earlier cobbled surface, which contains 15th century and therefore probably dates to that point too.
It's marvellous to see this.
I've laid some of the finds from the test pits out, sort of in chronological order, give you an idea what's going on. We've got the Romans down there all on their own, then a great big gap here.
This is the black hole of 400 years?
Yeah, this is the early and middle Saxon. say 450 to 850 AD. There's nothing so far. And then we arrive at the late Saxon. Now, when we're saying late Saxon, I suppose what we really mean is Viking age, 850 through into the 10th century. Then we've got this stuff, which is all the Norman period stuff, 11th to 12th century.
So those people who were saying that this is a medieval settlement, we've proved that that's wrong. We've got a lot of Norman stuff.
Yeah, we've got Norman and we've got pre-Norman, so I think from the pottery we've got here, there's very little doubt that there was a settlement here in the Norman times.
The pottery we found proves that there were people living in and around Nether Poppleton right through the medieval period and right back to the 11th century. That part of the village occupied by houses was laid out in the medieval period, but there was already a Norman community living here. So we closed down all the test pits in the village. They've answered that question. Out in Phil's trench, he's now reached the bottom of this feature. The Saxon pottery he found came from the other side of the trench. But what does this side tell us?
So what did you reckon? What have we got out of this now?
Well, not quite what we expected, Mick.
Right.
You remember on the geophysics, there was that white line, which we thought was going to be a beam slot, a building, that sort of thing. Well, there's no way that this is a building. This is a massive ditch. It's going to come out, what, at least that size.
Well, I was going to say, because you've only got one half, haven't you? The other half going to be over here somewhere.
And have you got any dating for that ditch?
Yep, we've had pottery from about the Norman conquest right through to about the 14th century. It's within those sort of 300 or 400 years.
Yeah.
And I think that what we're looking at is activity here in the early medieval period at the same period as that church starts to be built.
So what do you think we have got here?
I think it's probably something to do with, well, the Norman period, you know. The church is all of that sort of date and later. We'd expect some sort of manor house to go with it, probably somewhere in this area, if not down on the moated mound. And this is one of the land divisions associated with that.
The main thing is, I think, that we've actually got people living around here, which, of course, you don't have now.
Up on the top of the hill here.
If you look at it now, there's just one house here.
Yeah.
There's no village at all.
Yeah.
In those days, this would have been thriving.
But what of Mick's missing monastery here at the east end of the village around the church? Do we have any evidence for that? Well, we do.
Why they've used it as fish ponds is because it's an old river channel coming through there.
The Saxon ditch we found is most likely, in this instance, to have been from a monastic settlement. The church seems to have been built on the site of a former church or monastery. Its dedication to a saint who died 400 years earlier is an important clue. And the topography on a promontory is similar to that of many other monastic sites.
The mill wheel on the first floor, privy shape, really.
So now we just have to explain all of this to the people of Poppleton. What can we tell them after 3 days of exploring? Mick, can I borrow you a minute?
Yeah.
So we've got Anglo-Saxon here, Anglo-Saxon here.
Yeah, you must have some sort of hamlet here.
Well, to begin with, they were right. Their village is older than it looks. This pottery shows us that there was occupation here in Norman times and in Saxon times. In the Saxon period, there was an enormous enclosure surrounding a monastic settlement. It would have had a church as the centrepiece, houses, and a few workshops. The promontory it's situated on is perfect. Easy access to York and a bit of height to give it some security. In Norman times, the present church was built and a settlement grew up around it. The good news is that because of what we've discovered, you're going to be really busy for years to come. Thanks for having us.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Groby Old Hall lies in Leicestershire, 3 miles from Leicester. And to my mind, it's an archaeological theme park. There's an 18th century farmhouse, graced with the ruins of a magnificent 15th century brick manor, while in the garden, medieval masonry rubs shoulders with a huge mound or motte, the remnants of a Norman castle.
That's a classic motte. And
Yeah.
just that big mound of dirt. And then there's a big old bank out here, look, ain't there, look?
Oh, yeah?
So, to launch our attack on this fantastic site, we're starting with what we think was the home of Groby's first residents, the Normans. Geophiz have started to survey the top of the motte to see if they can pick up any evidence of that original castle. But Phil's already ahead of the game, as he thinks he's found our first glimpse of it just down the slope.
That wall, there's a big stone there.
Well, you know what they say, Phil? One stone's a stone, two stones a Norman castle.
Or in my neck of the woods, 2 stones is just a couple of stones. But this does look promising, and the perfect place to open our first trench to see if we do have part of the Norman castle and evidence of the Norman family that owned Groby for centuries. And talking of people at the top of their heap, Phil's found his initial couple of stones are turning into a considerable pile of stones. But are they our first evidence of the Grey family? Phil, have you got anywhere yet?
True, right, we have, Tony. We have got the remains of the stone building on the motte. Look, let me show you on the geophysics. Here is the stone building on the top of the motte, and our trench is exactly here. And we've got the wall here, look, Tony, look, there is the leading edge of it, the outside face of the wall, and it's coming out into this quarried area. And in that direction, it's filling up most of the side of the trench.
Well, that's a promising start.
But it gets better than that, Tony. You know there were some excavations done in the 60s on top of the motte there.
Yeah.
Well, we've actually got photographs of one of those trenches. That trench is right on the top of the mound. Look how wonderful this set of stone steps is, leading down into the motte.
So that should be under there somewhere.
All that material is right on the top of the motte. This is not this material here, this is not this wall. This is a totally separate excavation that they did in the 60s.
That's extraordinary. I thought we were going to be trying to find out how high this tower went. It now seems we're going to be looking at how deep it went as well. I think this is turning out to be rather a good dig. Right, everyone clear? We've got to get to the bottom of the wall. That way, we should be able to find out if the tower was here first and the motte was built around it, or if the motte came first, then the tower plonked on top. On most time teams, that would be a big enough challenge to keep us going for 3 days. But we've also got a 15th century manor house and a medieval wall here to get to grips with. And Mick thinks the key to all of that is the bailey, which he believes would have surrounded the motte. I understand what a motte is. It's the hill with the big building on the top. But what's a bailey?
Well, the bailey is the enclosure next to it. There's our motte, look. And these ditches and banks here, I think, are part of the bailey. This building is probably inside it, probably comes up to the road and then back somewhere like that. If this structure here is part of the main hall, then that building over there might well be the replacement for that.
So geophiz begin to survey the field in front of the motte for any evidence of the buildings Mick would expect to find in a bailey. And crucially, whether this standing wall once formed part of a great hall. And what makes this so exciting for me is that we've got a real chance to put people in any buildings we do find, because we do know that they were all built by one extraordinary family, the Greys.
This is Hugh Gromenil, who comes over to England with William of Normandy as part of the invading army, wins at the Battle of Hastings, and is rewarded by William, who now makes himself William I of England, with an enormous grant of land, which includes Groby. We know that he fortified here and he created a base here for himself. We actually know that because after the death of William of Normandy, he doesn't support the nominated heir, William Rufus, but supports William's oldest son. And so he has to build up the castle, he fortifies it and he builds up the walls, expecting trouble.
Phil, it's a long time since I've seen you excavate a wall that size.
This is a seriously big wall, Tony, and it's such a great thrill to get into a really deep hole. But of course, there is a really serious side about digging this deep hole, and that is to find out how old this wall is and how it was constructed. And the only way we can do that is to carry on digging deeper and get to the bottom of it.
Isn't that going to be a bit dangerous? It looks like it could collapse on you.
No, I mean, we've had to consider that, but you can see what we've done. We've already made the trench much, much wider, so that effectively slopes off the sides. It means we can go much, much deeper.
So can I walk up your terracing?
You can now, but once we've cleaned them, you keep off of them.
Yeah. We've now 2 days left to build up a picture of all the homes lived in by the Gray family at Groby, starting with their earliest residence, the Norman Castle. And yes, we've got walls in the geophyrs and in our trench, but they seem to be going down and down, and we just can't date them yet. But we do know that another trench in the 1960s located a staircase. Unfortunately, we can't locate that in the ground, so we're putting in a trench to locate that trench. Sorry, that staircase.
I don't think that's anything to write home about.
No, we need a late 20th century pyro expert for that.
Now I need to know if it's 1960.
Oh, it's a chalk ice, isn't it?
Is that 1960?
Over in Tracy's trench, we've now been digging for over a day, and I would like to have some idea of what's going on. Have you got any idea at all what sort of building this might be?
Well, I think it's probably a chamber block and a two-storey.
Why do you say it's two-storey?
Well, it is high status, it's substantially built, but if you look at the window over there by the door, it's only a very small window.
And what's the implication of the tiny window?
Well, if you've got a single-storey building, high status, you'd expect to have a lot more light coming into it.
Oh, I see. That implies that there must be another floor above where all the lords and ladies came.
With the windows in, yeah, the big windows, yeah.
So perhaps we can identify at least part of the home which the Greys lived in the 14th century. A two-storey chamber block with a top floor where the lords and ladies would have slept. And it's likely to be the white chamber mentioned in the dowry document with a cellar below, possibly the wine cellar. So nearly the end of day 2, and I think our quest to piece together the story of the Greys' homes is looking quite promising.
Oh, look at that. Blimey, it's quite big bits. It's all 15th century and probably the first half.
And Phil's finally got to the bottom of his castle wall. Have you done?
Too right, Tony, and it's been really, really worth it. It's just been an exceptional trench. I don't really want to leave it. I mean, we've known for some while about how this wall was built. So we've got these horizontally bedded stones that make the face on this side and on that side with this massive rubble infill, and then periodically these levelling up courses just to stabilise the whole thing. But the crucial thing that I wanted to know was, what were the foundations like? What was it actually built on?
And what's the answer?
Absolutely solid bedrock. I like to think that because this solid bedrock was here, that the area may have actually been present as an upstanding knoll, and that they were sufficiently good engineers or geologists to realise that this was a much more robust geology, and that it provided good foundations for a castle.
Have you found any evidence that any of this could be Saxon?
There's not a shred of evidence that it's Saxon. I think this is one beautiful Norman castle. Yes, have you, Ed? Come on. You've been in there for hundreds of years.
Phil, I gather you got something interesting.
Absolutely, Mick. I finally got to the bottom.
Right.
And I think we've finally got the actual threshold here for the doorway.
Because you've got a door jamb one side, haven't you?
That's right. We've got the jamb there, and we've got a jamb on this side. You probably can't see.
Oh, yeah, I can just see the corner of that.
We've got this floor dead level.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's going into the middle of the tower, isn't it?
We think we got the tower,
yeah,
with a doorway,
yeah,
and in there is a cellar.
Yeah.
This is where this is going into.
Right.
At a later stage, they take away the doorway, because
right,
it's nice stone.
Yeah.
Probably a decent door. And they just plug up the hole with these stones. And then they fill the middle in with clay.
So we've almost cracked it. We know when the castle was built in the Norman period, who built it, Hugh Groby, and why it descends so deep underground, because there was once a cellar at the bottom of it, accessed by our stairs. So perhaps when the Greys' fortunes rose with William Ferrers in the 14th century, they began to build their stunning medieval home with two-storey accommodation, a magnificent great hall and buttressed ranges forming a quadrangle. A property fit for the remarkable Elizabeth Woodville, Queen of England. And later her son, the Marquis Thomas Grey, went one better, demolishing this stone palace and building an even more fashionable brick residence, our 15th century tower.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
Meet a real Time Team fan. This is Francis Davis, who lives up here at Skipsea in Blowy, East Yorkshire. And to put it mildly, you're fairly interested in what was going on in this field, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Why? It looks like all your other fields.
Except they ploughed deeper one year and we turned up all these finds.
Which are really fantastic. We've got everything from this prehistoric arrowhead right through to medieval. In fact, Frances was so excited that she paid at her own expense for our geophys team, if this doesn't blow away, to have a survey. And as you can see, there's a heck of a lot of activity. So clearly something was going on here. But what exactly? We don't know. This place is an archaeological blank sheet. So Frances has invited us here. And how long have we got to find out?
3 days.
Just 3 days. Well, it's going to be a battle against the wind today because Francis's field here at Skipsea is on the east coast, just above Hull. Geophys are working as quickly as possible to extend their survey on this ridge of higher ground, while these two trenches give us our first look at what they're detecting. Already just digging through the topsoil is turning up more finds.
Bit of slag, and I reckon that's medieval, the one bit of pottery so far.
I think so as well.
The luckier members of the team are starting work in the incident room.
Francis, what we're going to try and do for you to help you understand what's going on in the field is get all the finds you've had into a timeline so we can see exactly when there's lots of activity going on and when it dies away. But I think, Phil, you've just about gone on top of the prehistoric.
Yeah, I mean, this is lovely little collection of flint. This all came out of the same field.
Within sort of 50 metres either way.
It is
Straight away, Phil can tell Francis that all her flint finds date to the early Neolithic period, around 4000 BC.
What you've actually got is evidence of the first farmers that were actually living in Britain.
But you need an expert eye to appreciate some of them.
It's just been flaked very, very finely at that end. What you've actually got is a little end scraper. It's an actual scraping tool.
For dealing with hides and skins and things like that.
That's right. The other thing that is immediately nice is this lovely little leaf arrowhead.
Phil's able to date this to the Neolithic because the shape of flint arrows changed over time. So why did we put this trench in?
You know, we've got this network of ditches.
Yeah.
We really wanted to get some dating evidence and see what's happening to them. I thought there might be an actual break at this point as well, so that was a good point. It turns out that the strong anomaly is actually an iron spike in the trench there.
This looks modern, but over in the corner of the trench, Bridge has uncovered some burnt stones that obviously need more investigation.
You can see on top of this really big one, it's got lots of heat-affected material, and it's as if hot air's been running across it.
What, through there like that?
Exactly.
Yeah. In terms of dating evidence, the only clue we've found so far is one bit of pottery. Prehistoric?
Yes, that could be Iron Age. In this area, the Iron Age pottery is usually quite coarse and decorated.
But we've also got things turning up that surely can't be Iron Age.
Come and have a look at this. Look at it.
What, this thing here?
Well, yeah.
It looks like a piece of old junk, doesn't it?
No, but it's look, listen to that. That's lead, and it's got this big. Well, we obviously got this big bit of iron here.
What, have we got a piece of aeroplane?
No, it is not. It's lead.
Really?
I don't understand why you're getting a bit excited about it. I mean, it's with some debris that looks pretty late.
Well, I know it does, but at the same time, it's inescapable that there is a ditch running along here, and there's no immediate sign of anything that has been actually cut through to allow this to be put in.
What is the lead thing there, Phil? Is it some sort of vessel or tank or something?
Yeah, it's like a big sort of, well, like a shallow bucket. There's the bottom of it,
yeah,
and there's the rim of it.
Phil's also found bits of a crucible, making him think that this could be a furnace for ironworking. The ditch runs under the furnace, so there are at least 2 periods of activity here. Complicated site, isn't it?
It's great.
Just as Mick predicted, this is looking like a site that's got traces of people living here over thousands of years. Geophys are excited about their latest results. Yesterday we started with just this small area to go on. Then they added this, and now they've extended into this field and discovered the signals are getting busier and stronger. But is their plot showing human activity or just geology? More than ever, what we really need now is some secure dating evidence. And here in Trench 2, it looks like Matt has come up with the goods. Not only can he confirm this geophys black line is a large ditch, but he's also discovered the base of what looks like an oven built in the ditch after it had silted up. Most important, though, he's got some dating evidence for us in the shape of lovely large bits of pot.
Francis, I wanted you to see this pottery that Peter's got because you're getting very excited about it, look.
I have it here, Francis. You can see that it's a jar or cooking pot. It's got a nice groove around the inside of the rim for putting a lid in, and even on the outside the actual soot from the last time it was used to make a meal spilt over the edge and got burnt on. And it's 11th century basically.
Oh wow.
Either side of the Norman conquest.
So round about the time of the Norman conquest.
You don't see it every day of the week, so.
The Norman Motte and Bailey Castle must have looked something like this and was positioned here not only to control access along these sand islands, but to provide a lookout against invasion from the sea. It's hard to imagine now, but our site just across the mere was next door to the centre of power in Holderness in the 11th century. Now more than ever, I'm really curious to know what was going on here in Francis's field. The question is, can we work it out?
What is it and how old is it? I suppose is
This is the big question.
Right, what is it? The clay is quite pink, but it hasn't really been highly fired. It's not fired hard. So I don't think it's a particularly high temperature process. I don't really think it's to do with metalworking. Also, you've got the ash being scraped out that way, and there doesn't look at the moment as though there aren't lots of little bits of fragments of slag in it, are there?
No, not really, no. It's all around. You can see the bags over here.
Well, I think this is just slag that's kicking around the site, and I think this is probably more an organic process, something maybe even just smoking fish, smoking meat, making brine. It's not industrial activity, but there is industrial activity in the area.
So we now know something about this end of our geophys plot. We know this was a big field boundary ditch that was open in the 11th century, but later had a clay oven built into the bottom of it. We've also got evidence of other low temperature processes going on here, most likely to do with salt making. Apparently there have been 3 other lead buckets found in coastal regions in Yorkshire, and they too date to the 10th and 11th centuries. Ours apparently is far superior because it's been made from just one piece of lead. As a valuable commodity, it's been deliberately folded before being put into the ground, presumably for safekeeping. Only the person who left it never returned to retrieve it.
This is what you've seen so far, and we've extended the survey towards...
Oh, crikey, it just goes on and on and on, doesn't it?
And look, there's this massive... Well, I'm calling it a D-shaped enclosure, which I was getting quite excited about. But then we continued the survey.
Oh, crikey, it's just going on.
It's just unbelievable.
Well, it certainly changes my point of view from out of my kitchen window. Because of thinking what was out here.
I'm just wondering whether it's a
John's never seen anything quite like it. To him, it looks more Iron Age than medieval. So where do we dig to find some answers?
If we're going to get some dating evidence for this sort of enclosure, then I think that would be a good place to go in the first instance.
So trench number 6 gets underway. And it doesn't take long for Rakshar to take off the topsoil and reveal the ditch.
There's this other one at the side.
But can she tell what date it is?
Originally, by the shape of the ditch, we thought that it was Iron Age in shape, but the pottery says otherwise. It's actually medieval.
All the pottery in this trench dates to around the time of the Norman conquest, and there's loads of it, suggesting we must be close to where people are actually living. But not only that, because we aren't finding any later pottery, Stuart thinks we may be discovering a settlement that was given up for farmland by the early 14th century. Because as this aerial photo shows, Francis's field was covered by medieval ploughing.
The coastline is actually quite a relevant part of our story here.
This is apparently the fastest eroding coastline in Britain, with something like 2 metres falling into the sea each year. In medieval times, the coastline was way out here, and we know that several settlements, such as Cleaton, were recorded as falling into the sea. Did all the people who were living in what's now under the sea tend to move in the direction of Skipsea?
Exactly, that's a critical point, because it's like not only did they have to move and live somewhere else, but they've lost that much agricultural ground. Therefore, on the ground that was left, there's a more intense period of agriculture, and it's that intense period of agriculture we see the physical evidence of in our field. And that's one of the main reasons why Skipsea actually grew up as a settlement. The coastline was retreating.
Our final day, and with no time to waste, we're opening another trench. Its main goal is to find evidence of one of the buildings that was part of the Norman period settlement we're discovering here. Geophys have added even more to their amazing map of human activity in this field. The problem is, we only have today left to try and make sense of it. This morning, they've moved into the field next door to see if they can find out where the settlement actually ends. But it's a great problem to have. We're discovering a settlement connected with big history, the Norman conquest, an event that had terrible consequences for the people living here who resisted the change.
William the Conqueror came up to the north and brought an army up here, and in the winter he wasted the north. It was called the harrying of the north. He burnt the villages, he burnt their seed corn, which means they're going to start the next year, and many, many thousands of people died.
And what do we know about the effect all of these changes had on the daily lives of the people who are actually living here?
By the time we come back to Domesday Book in 1086, 20 years after the conquest, the population has fallen to only 7 families, and the value has gone down from £32 to £6, when nothing is happening at all.
So the people using this pottery would have seen a lot of change and a lot of suffering.
Absolutely, yes.
Whether we can fully understand the features we're digging or not, everything has to be recorded so that someone can puzzle over it later.
Oh, haven't got that one.
The archaeology is very complicated and would require a bigger trench to sort it out. But below these medieval ditches, Phil's found something we haven't seen on this site before.
One thing that we have got in this trench is evidence of the earliest occupation on the hill. And it's a circular thing.
Yes.
Phil reckons he's found a curving ditch belonging to an Iron Age roundhouse. A reminder that there's evidence of earlier occupation here, but it's hidden by the later medieval settlement on top.
Terry, I think I've found a brooch.
Oh, that's very nice. No, that is a buckle. This piece is the tongue that fits over this rod-shaped piece.
Wow, okay.
And the strap, you see, comes and fastens around here. And the other end limps underneath.
So it's a belt buckle?
Yes, yes, it's a copper alloy belt buckle with little moulded ends. 12th, 13th century.
There are so many finds here that I can't believe we're not going to find a building. Carenza, meanwhile, is wondering what this settlement was called.
The established view when we arrived here was that Cleaton, the place that's named in the Domesday record but has vanished now, has vanished because it was eroded by the sea. Well, we've now found a settlement of that date over there. Susan says the logical inference is that is the settlement of Cleaton, but Stuart, you're not convinced?
Well, I came across this reference in a document of 1306 which says Nova Haide Burgi de Cleaton, the new harbour for Cleaton. Now, the implication to me there is that the harbour and Cleaton are on the coastline.
Well, yes, I agree that's one interpretation, but I have another one, which is that the settlement itself was further inland and that Cleaton really needed a landing place on the coast. The other reason for thinking this is Cleaton is that all these lands in the southern part of Skipsea parish were called Cleaton lands. Even as late as the 18th century, they were part of the copyhold of the manor of Cleaton. And it seems logical, if we've got this settlement, obviously evidence of some settlement for the dig, inland, that this could be Cleaton.
And in fact, it's on the sort of prime spot. It's the highest point in the parish.
That's right, it's the high ridge in the parish.
I'm just worried we're pinning the tail on the donkey, that we found the settlement, we've got a name, and we're making the two together.
I think we've got the tail in the right place. I'm inclined to agree with Susan.
Well, Stuart may not be sure about the name of the settlement, but he's got plenty to tell Frances about the history of her field. This enclosure map of 1785 shows the shape of the original medieval fields.
Now, if you look at the evidence from the aerial photography, those are the fields of ridge and furrow. They were still surviving when this aerial photograph was taken in the 1940s. There's some more up here, for instance.
Victor's drawing shows the kind of settlement that Stuart believes was here just before the Norman conquest. But he reckons the settlement was abandoned when this field was needed for ridge and furrow ploughing as Skipsea was expanding.
Then later on, it happens again. In 1765, the Enclosure Bill, imposition of regular fields all across this landscape. The open fields that were part of the ridge and forest system disappeared. So the field you've got now is like a capsule of all those events in history.
Time's almost up, and after collecting something like 250,000 readings, Geophys are ready to sit down and report to Francis.
Well, this is how the field was 2 years ago when we first came to do the survey for you, obviously if you ignore the trenches and the cars. And that's what we managed to achieve in the 3 days.
That is totally unbelievable.
I'm still amazed myself. I mean, we've gone into your neighbour's field now and it just continues in all directions. We've not actually been able to find a limit to the site.
Well, I thought there might have been a small village or a small settlement up there, but to actually see that...
Grayson's done some wonders with the graphics, converted the dots and the blobs and so on into the sort of ditches. OK, we haven't got the houses and so on, but that's sort of the first stage towards rebuilding that picture. Then it all disappeared and got covered with the ridge and furrow, the ploughing.
And finally, out in Francis's field, Phil's got some last-minute good news.
Well, Mick, I reckon we got our building.
Yeah?
I really do. I mean, what we got is this kind of, well, this big hollow area.
Yeah.
Which is running from Matt, and the edge is running right round here. So it looks like we got the end of it.
Right.
And then along here, we got this definite row of stones. Inside, we've also got stones. We've never had stones anywhere else in the site. And along this row of stones, you even got a sort of gravelly core to it as well, which smacks to me as though that may well be a wall line or something. Beyond it, we got what looks like a ditch.
Added to that, this ditch is crammed full of finds. What does our buildings historian think?
I think those line of stones is a clue, because often with a mud house you would want a firm base, a solid base that wouldn't rot, wouldn't get damp, and so the cobblestones there would help. The gravelly piece is interesting because the type of mud wall we've got has pebbles in it, has mud hole, that sort of thing is maybe the remnants of some bit of mud walling.
It's difficult to reconstruct with so little solid evidence, but we do know something about medieval mud houses from the few that survived into modern times. Basically, we're talking about farmsteads that look something like this. Essentially, a building that, when pulled down, would leave little more than a few stones and a scatter of pottery to tell you it was ever there.
Are you confused by all the information you've got, or has it all become crystal clear?
I think it's almost become as clear as mud, but there's just so much, absolutely so much.
Whose evidence really impressed you?
I think Geophys, because they have shown the extent of it, but then the evidence of the fact that we've got the bottom of our pond is 13,000 years old, the end of the last ice age, and we can actually tell what the scenery was like then. But it's just the whole thing is overwhelming.
But it's the importance of what this plot has revealed that tips the balance in favour of Geophys. Their survey is showing a range of periods of occupation, dating at least from the Iron Age through to a rarely found settlement of the Norman period. Untangling the many phases and ditches is a massive job, but this is Victor's attempt to show Francis what life was like here around the time of the Norman conquest.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.